Long before the known histories of man were written in stone, long before Egypt's pyramids touched the sky or Babylon's towers pierced the heavens, there existed a mighty empire whose name has echoed through time like a whisper across civilizations: Atlantis. Its story was nearly lost, preserved not in parchment or monument, but in the oral traditions passed down through priests of forgotten temples. It was the Egyptian sages of the city of Sais who told the tale to a wise Greek lawgiver named Solon, who in turn passed it to his kin, until it came to Plato, the philosopher who first spoke the name Atlantis to the Western world. There was an island, Plato wrote in Timaeus, greater than Libya and Asia combined, situated beyond the Pillars of Heracles. But this was no ordinary island. It was the cradle of a people descended from gods, whose might, wisdom, and beauty surpassed all others, until, like Icarus, they flew too close to the sun. In the beginning, almost 15,000 to 20,000 years ago, the island of Atlantis was said to be a paradise, untouched by war, corruption, or greed. It rose from the sea like a gem, surrounded by fertile plains and sacred mountains, blessed with warm breezes and rich soil. But its greatness came not merely from the land, it came from the gods who ruled it. According to the ancient account, the sea god Poseidon laid claim to Atlantis, and in its central hill he found a mortal woman named Cleito. Enraptured by her, he surrounded the hill with rings of water and land to protect her. 3 moats and 2 strips of land, concentric and perfect. There he made her his queen, and to her he bore 5 sets of twin sons, 10 princes who would become kings of the land. He gave the island to his eldest son, Atlas, who became the first high king. It was from him that the island took its name, Atlantis, the land of Atlas. His brothers ruled the provinces, forming a sacred confederation of 10 kingdoms, each loyal to the divine laws etched in orichalcum, a metal said to shine brighter than flame. Each prince ruled one of the outer regions, but they swore allegiance to Atlas, who reigned over the capital. In a great circle outside the central palace stood statues of these 10 kings, each cast in orichalcum and placed in honor by their people. These princes were not merely rulers, but initiates of divine law and guardians of the Atlantean way. Poseidon, like the other gods of Olympus, had chosen a mortal realm to favor. Just as Athena chose Athens, Zeus with Olympia, and Apollo with Delphi, Poseidon made Atlantis his sacred dominion. There he planted the trident, a symbol of divine kingship and control over the sea and spiritual wisdom. In the center of the island, the capital rose like a vision from the dreams of the gods. It was a city built in perfect circles, formed of alternating belts of land and sea. Canals connected the rings, and mighty bridges spanned the waters. Each circular wall was faced with a different kind of stone, white, black, and red, symbolizing the harmony of polarities and the unity of diversity. These materials were quarried from within the island itself, polished and fitted together without mortar. The outermost wall of the city was plated in brass, the middle wall in tin, and the innermost wall was covered in orichalcum, which shimmered with a reddish golden light. Then the center wall, which surrounded the central palace, was plated in pure gold. At the heart of it all was the sacred hill, crowned by a temple to Poseidon and Cleito, covered in silver, gold, and orichalcum. Within, a massive statue of Poseidon stood tall, driving 6 winged horses through the heavens, surrounded by 100 Nereids riding horses, his eyes blazing with gems. The interior of the royal palace was lavish beyond comprehension. Walls and ceilings were inlaid with ivory, gold, silver, and the brilliant orichalcum giving off a light of its own. The city was divided into rings, and each ring was inhabited by different classes. The innermost ring, closest to the temple, was the Sacred Heart of Atlantis. Here lived the royal family, descendants of Poseidon himself, alongside the high priests and priestesses who performed the sacred rites and preserved the divine laws. Their homes were adorned in ivory and gold, with open courtyards and sacred fountains. Towering spires and sanctuaries of orichalcum reflected the light like fire, and the air was filled with the scent of incense and the sound of ritual hymns echoing through marble halls. The second ring housed the warrior class and aristocracy. Broad avenues led to training arenas, council halls, and high towers where banners of noble houses flew in the sea breeze. These warriors were not only soldiers but philosophers, guardians of wisdom and law, trained in the martial and mystical arts alike. Their manners were elegant yet fortified, decorated with mosaics and symbols of lineage, surrounded by gardens and private shrines to the gods. The outer ring belonged to the lifeblood of the city, the merchants, artisans, and farmers. It teemed with activity, vibrant markets, bustling workshops, and fertile fields sustained by intricate irrigation canals. Buildings here were crafted in bright stone and painted tile, full of character and adorned with the fruits of craftsmanship. The people of this ring were skilled, proud, and free, their labor and creativity sustaining the brilliance of the empire. Buildings gleamed with color and luster. The Atlanteans used many precious metals to plate their walls and temples. Aqueducts brought spring water into the city. Hot and cold springs gushed freely, forming sacred baths where health and ceremony were joined. These waters, said to be gifts from Poseidon himself, were used for both healing and initiation. Their engineers carved harbors large enough to fit 1,000 ships. Their soldiers marched in great armies organized in sacred geometries. And their fields, vast, rectangular, and orderly, were irrigated with astonishing precision. Nothing was left to chaos. All was formed in balance with divine order. The air of Atlantis was said to always be filled with human voices, as its marketplaces, harbors, and temples were always bustling with all manner and races of people. There were also many recreational establishments, from places of exercise for men and beasts to race courses for horses. Great knowledge and wisdom of the divine, the universe, and mysticism was kept in the temples and the priests of Atlantis. The high priests were not only practitioners of this knowledge and magic, but also protectors, allowing only the wise and initiated to partake in its use. The 10 kings of Atlantis ruled over their respective domains, but every 5 and 6 years they would gather in the capital. There, clothed in blue robes, they would renew their oath before the statue of Poseidon. A sacred golden tablet, inscribed with divine laws, lay upon the altar. Each king would swear to uphold the will of the god and govern with wisdom and justice. Their chief laws forbade war among the 10 kingdoms. They were to come to each other's aid, resolve disputes in council, and protect the divine balance. Markets brimmed with goods from across the known world. Atlantis was a hub of trade and commerce. Its harbors welcomed ships bearing metals, spices, lumber, grain, and sacred artifacts. Gold and silver flowed through their economy, but it was orichalcum, a sacred metal of the gods, that served as the symbol of their supremacy. There were not only temples to Poseidon, but to many gods, the temples to Hephaestus, Apollo, Zeus, Hera, and Demeter stood across the provinces, each integrated into the religious and civic life of the people. These temples were not mere places of worship, but centers of education, healing, and sacred rites. For generations, the Atlanteans lived in accordance with the laws of Poseidon, which were sacred and unchanging. They were not merely builders or warriors. They were philosophers, mystics, priests of the eternal flame. They knew the hidden sciences, the music of the spheres, and the geometry of the soul. They built their civilization not only on stone, but on harmony between spirit and matter. Their kings ruled justly, not with tyranny, but with understanding. Every law was a reflection of higher truths. But time is the great corrupter. As ages passed and the blood of the gods thinned, the descendants of Atlas and his brothers forgot their sacred heritage. What was once a temple became a fortress. The priesthoods gave way to dynasties of power. Gold, once a symbol of the sun and spiritual truth, became a symbol of conquest and greed. When the divine portion began to fade away in them, Plato wrote, and became diluted too often and too much with the mortal admixture, they became unseemly. The Atlanteans grew arrogant. They turned their gaze beyond the seas. They built warships not for protection, but for domination. Their armies swept across the Mediterranean, conquering lands and subjugating nations. Only one city stood against them, ancient Athens, a city still in harmony with the divine law. Athens, in Plato's tale, resisted the Atlantean onslaught despite their vast power, showing that moral virtue was stronger than brute force. This, Plato suggests, was the final test, the moment when Atlantis, having strayed from the balance of the gods, was judged. And it was Zeus, king of Olympus, who beheld the corruption from his high throne. Outraged by their pride and the forsaking of divine law, he summoned the gods to deliberate the fate of Atlantis. Though the speech of Zeus is lost in Plato's incomplete dialogue Critias, it is clear the judgment was set. According to Plato, the fall of Atlantis began around 9600 BCE, or roughly 12,000 years ago, and the sentence came swiftly. The earth itself convulsed. The skies darkened. Thunder split the heavens. Earthquakes shattered the land and opened the sea. In a single day and night, Atlantis was consumed by the ocean. The empire was no more, its towers, temples, and treasures drowned beneath the waves. It is said that the Atlantean priests, warned of the coming doom, escaped in ships. They traveled across the earth, hiding their knowledge in temples and pyramids, passing it down through symbols, rites, and oral teachings. These sages became the founders of civilization. They taught agriculture to nomads, geometry to masons, astrology to kings, and the sacred fire of divine memory to all those who would listen. Some scholars saw the story of Atlantis as being perhaps part historical, but most likely a profound allegory, one that reveals not only the cycles of civilization, but the very structure of the human soul. The sage Manly P. Hall writes that Atlantis is not merely a continent lost to the sea, but a symbol of the spiritual man who has fallen into matter. The concentric rings of the Atlantean city represent layers of consciousness from the divine center, or the higher self, to the outer world of material illusion. The decline of Atlantis mirrors the soul's fall from grace, its loss of divine memory, and its entanglement in desire, pride, and illusion. The Atlanteans' pride is our own, the tendency of humanity to turn from inward wisdom to outward conquest. Their destruction is a warning. When a civilization forgets its spiritual roots, it invites catastrophe. Some would claim the survivors of Atlantis brought the seeds of wisdom to Egypt, Mesoamerica, Greece, and India, among other civilizations. The mystery schools, the sacred temples of initiation, the symbols etched in stone and myth, all are said to be echoes of Atlantis, echoes of a time when spirit and matter were balanced. Some also speculate that the figure Hermes Trismegistus or Thoth originated from Atlantis and went on to teach and aid various civilizations after its fall. Across time and within each age's movements, Atlantis has been perceived and talked about in many different lenses, by many different people, some of which we may explore in the future. But ultimately, the truth about Atlantis is unknown. There hasn't been any archaeological findings of the actual city Plato and others described, which makes the theory stating that Plato created this story as a symbolic allegory about man and spirituality the most likely answer. Perhaps one day some ruins of the city, more ancient texts and tablets, or other revelations will be discovered to shed more light on the true nature of the lost city of Atlantis. But until then, it is left for us to fill in the gaps. Atlantis may never rise from the sea, but its story rises endlessly in the soul and mind of man. Whether as a lost land or a symbol of forgotten truth, it reminds us of a golden age within, a time before the fall, when gods walked among us, when humans were wise, peaceful, and virtuous. There is much more to explore when it comes to the story of Atlantis. There are many theories and speculation regarding the significant figures in Atlantis, its origin, the nature of its so-called gods, the speculation of extraterrestrials, the Anunnaki, and its role in the greater picture of human history. If you want to learn more about some of these mysteries and theories, or have any opinions on the topic, let us know in the comments. And stay tuned for more videos on mind, body, spirit. Stay curious and have a good day.